Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting, and thank you for your patience again. I know that was quite some time and it was a very arduous process, but it's good to have that information. So welcome to tonight's council meeting for the 25th of May. Could we just stand for the prayer, please, and acknowledgement? Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Okay, I'll start by acknowledging that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. I've not been made aware of any conflict of interest declarations. Mr. Zaknich.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This advice to the council meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act and disclosure of political donations. Under section 10.4 of the Act, a person is required when submitting planning or applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report, detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of the function of a council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zaknich. Apologies, we're all here and accounted for. There is no Merrill minutes, CM5, CM6 action plans. Thanks, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete, for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, action in progress, and 4, long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to those that motion? Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, in fact, having refreshed my memory of all of these just now, flicking through them, no, in fact, I have no words to add.
Thank you. Councillor King, have you got a question? You've got your yellow.
Yes, I've got my question thing up. It's just in relation to the contractor bonds that was raised in urgent business 10 months ago, and that the report is coming through next month. Could the relevant member of staff give us an explanation, given that it was in urgent business, why we're 11 months before this report is going to be presented to us?
Mr. Christie.
Mr. Christie.
Thank you for the question and for you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do note it was raised in urgent business, but for this particular and for a variety of reasons, the staff haven't had time to finish off the recommendations in the report, and hence the delay.
Councillor King. Happy?
No, it takes 11 months to get probably a 2-page report, but anyway, I've noted it. Thank you.
Thank you. Your reception is breaking up badly, so yeah. Okay, are there any further questions in relation to this item? There appears to be no further question or debate. Councillor Stusby, do you wish to close debate on this item?
No, we will skip that.
Okay, so I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. And those councillors were Councillors Doxy, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Stusby, Councillor Con, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Glacken, Councillor King, and Councillor Thurling. Councillor Mack. Thank you, councillors. Okay, we've got the confirmation minutes from the previous meeting, 7.1, the extraordinary meeting held on Tuesday, the 5th of May. Councillor Doxy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the following recommendation, that the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting held on Tuesday, 5 May 2020 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you, Councillor Stusbury.
Yes, embarrassed to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxy. Did you wish to speak to that at all?
What can I say after that? No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? We've got Councillor Mack, Councillor Doxy, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Glacken, Councillor King, Councillor Stusby and Councillor Con. The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 7.2, the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, the 11th of May. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stusby.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do recommend that we accept the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, the 11th of May 2020 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you, Councillor Doxy.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stusby, do you wish to speak to them at all?
I have read the minutes in detail and I have no comments. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. Those in favour, Councillor Mack, Councillor Doxy, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Con, Councillor Stusby and Councillor King. The motion is carried. Reports from community forums, we have none. Councillor Thurley.
I just wait for the motion to appear on the board, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council 1 recognises that climate change is one of the most significant issues that will impact the social, cultural, economic and environmental health and wellbeing of our community, and will act accordingly with all policies and programs of this council. And 2, is committed to promoting the reduction of carbon emissions to support our community and businesses to be climate ready and to facilitate practices of regeneration, stewardship and sustainability for our city.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
I'm happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor, I have a question. Councillor Thurley, do you have him take the question before you open debate?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stusby, question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is directed to Councillor Thurley. And my question is really a very simple one. Given that climate change has been on the radar for a long time now and recognised as a problem, and this council has now been running for 3.5 or more years. Why would Councillor Thurley have brought this topic up right now when we have many other things on our plate to?
Councillor Thurley.
It's my right as a councillor to propose a notice of motion whenever I feel fit.
There you go. There's your response, Councillor Stusby. There are no questions. Councillor Thurley, could you open debate, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a motion to tell our community that we care and we're doing something about it. It's also a motion to bring all of the community along together. We don't want to divide people according to what they think about climate change. This is a motion of solidarity with other local government areas who've moved motions similar, some using the word emergency and some not. And this is a motion to tell others that we need them to act too. In the light of the bushfires we had beginning way back in September last year and continuing on and on and on, we need to do something. And at the moment, there seems to be precious little coming from other levels of government. In fact, it's almost shameful to hear our government, our federal government, looking at relaxing green tape and green laws and environmental laws. laws when we need ever more stronger laws and ever more stronger action to deal with this issue of climate change. I wanted to move this motion to recognise that our council has been doing a lot and it's not been completely told to the public. We've got our hard waste campaign, which reduces the amount of stuff going to landfill. We've got a community energy fund, installing solar panels on council buildings, LED street lighting, methane capture and electricity generation at the landfill, a solar farm at the landfill. So we've got all the runs on the board. And if you don't believe in climate change, then just take it that we're doing our best to save you money with all of these activities. I understand from the two speakers we had who are passionate about climate change, and I've heard Eli speak before, and I understand the climate strike. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of climate change to our community. However, I want all people in this community to come along with us. And I've made this as strong as I feel I can and backed it up with a whole heap of programs and things that this council is doing. I want the message to be sent to state and federal government that we need you to do more. Local government will bear the brunt of the things that happen with climate change: flooding, inundation, bushfires, loss of arable land, and things of that nature. We can only do so much. We need our federal and state governments to act on our behalf as well. I do this motion in support of our community and of other local government areas. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Another speaker for, none against, but I have a question from Councillor Con. Councillor Con?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not a question, but I'd like to move an amendment to Councillor Thurley's motion, please.
So you're speaking against, but you're proposing an amendment, yes?
I am not speaking against. I'm proposing an amendment.
Thank you.
I propose that we replace the words climate change in part 1 with the climate emergency. And I'm happy to speak to that change if I can get a seconder.
Okay, there's no one on the screen seconding. I'm happy to, for the purpose of debate, second your change or amendment. Thank you, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman.
It's most unusual for you to be seconding a motion.
Well, Councillor Vanderman, I am, and until someone tells me different, I'm happy to pursue this for the purpose of the democratic debate. And I have done it previously, so I can't see why it's any different.
I don't believe it's the ordinary business of the mayor to be seconding motions. You are the chair of the meeting, not there to move or second motions.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman, for your insight, but I'm still maintaining I'm able to second that motion from the chair. Councillor Con, could you propose your amendment, please, and continue with the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The change that I'm proposing is actually not significant or substantial at all. It's a replacement of 2 words, and it doesn't change any of the really important and tangible efforts that this council has made on climate change. Councillor Thurley's already mentioned some of these things. I'm so proud that this council, before I ever thought about running, implemented the Halve Waste campaign that reduced organic waste from landfill that would have produced methane, that we ran the Energy Savings Action Plan that had fantastic results. And in this term of council, we agreed unanimously to become a member of the city's power partnership, to fund the community energy fund, to include environment and climate risk in all of our officers' reports to council. All of those things were agreed unanimously, and I'm really proud of the efforts that this council has made on climate. The word emergency itself is defined as something dangerous or serious that happens suddenly or unexpectedly and needs fast action in order to avoid harmful results. I didn't coin that term. There was an expert statement that was endorsed by 11,000 scientists from 153 nations that was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal that stated, "We declare clearly and unequivocally that planet Earth is facing a climate emergency." Now, that term has unfortunately been politicized by some, but it's a correct factual description of what's happening. And it obviously has meaning to people in our community. We've just been addressed by 2 very passionate and very articulate speakers who congratulated us for our work on climate change, but who requested that we make this small wording change. that would have no impact on the good, tangible work that we're doing, but that does obviously have meaning to our community. And that's why I'm suggesting it. It's actually the position of our peak body. The Local Government New South Wales Conference last year in 2019 adopted a motion on climate change that used the term emergency. And 1,496 local governments across the world have used the term emergency to describe climate change. That includes 96 councils in Australia, 34 councils in New South Wales, and 15 of those 34 are regional councils, such as Armidale, Bega Valley, Broken Hill City Council, Clarence Valley, and Glen Innes Severn Council. That obviously covers a huge geographic range and political range of councils. I think that using the correct technical term to describe the issue that we all agree is important is appropriate, and that it, as Councillor Thurley says, this is a motion to tell our community that we care. I fully support the rest of Councillor Thurley's motion, and if my amendment is lost, I tend to support his motion. But I think that we should use the correct terminology that would have meaning to people in our community who care enough about climate change to take the time to address us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Con. I have two speakers against and one for. Councillor Vandervan speaking against the amendment.
Against the amendment and for the original motion. We just don't need the word emergency. Councillor Con has indicated there's, I think she said 1,496 local councils around the world have used the word emergency. Well, there's 1,496 councils in Australia, New Zealand, and any other democracy. So there's probably 50,000 local councils that haven't used the word emergency. I believe Councillor Thurley has it exactly right. I fully support Councillor Thurley's motion. We want to try and get the majority of our people on board with the sentiment of this particular motion and the actions around it. We don't need to be alarmist or be using the emergency word in this particular motion. So I'm against the amendment and for the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Speaker for, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak for the amendment and for the original motion. I was undecided up until extremely recently about the term climate emergency. It's not a term that I've found particularly appealing or enjoyable to read. I think that I'm a member of an excellent council with a great record on climate adaptation, and this predates my time on council. Many of the fantastic decisions that have been made, including the Harve Waste campaign, were made before my time. But I think from memory, and Councillor Vandervan will, I'm sure, correct me on this, I think from memory, virtually every motion that we've had before us on climate and renewables has been passed unanimously. This is an excellent council of progressive thinkers who understand the potential damage and implications that climate change could well cause. And I did like Councillor Thurley's original notice of motion and indicated to him that I would support it, and I do, although I'm somewhat suspicious of the timing of it. And I initially thought that Councillor Con's amendment was perhaps mealy mouthed, but she actually gave, I thought, quite a spirited defence of the amendment, and in understanding the true meaning of the word emergency, I think that it's probably defensible that what is happening is indeed an emergency, and I support her. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to make it very clear that I do, in fact, believe there is a climate emergency on. I think the evidence is indisputable. But I take a little of what Councillor Stutchbury has said and much of what and all of what Councillor Thurley has said. And the need here is for a unanimous, hopefully, outcome. We have always been a council that has managed to agree when it comes to ecological issues, and that we want that to continue. It is problematic for some people, and they have that right to include the word emergency, and it is unnecessary in the greater scheme of things. So I oppose this amendment. It is typical, absolutely typical. And we've heard tonight from two members of the Greens, of the New South Wales Greens, on their own particular view of the world and how we should all conform to that view. Von Clausewitz said, the enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan. And I will never forget in 2007, when Labor tried to introduce a national emissions trading scheme, which would have had untold benefit to the ecology of Australia and the world, how the Greens conspired through their own petulant and pedantic and self-serving and self-aggrandizing. I'm glad you're nodding with me, Mr. Ferris, so it's very encouraging. And how they conspired with the Liberal Party and the National Party to vote down Labor's 2007 emissions trading scheme. Their attitude seems to be, unless it fits their dogma entirely in every minor detail, then they will oppose it. It's very sad indeed. We had an opportunity for this to sail through tonight with unanimous support, but the temptation to grandstand was just too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron, for speaking against. There appears to be no further speakers for all questions. So, Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate on your amendment? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, in response to Councillor Cameron, I made it very clear I wasn't opposing anything, and I would be happy to support Councillor Thurley's original motion, and I will if this amendment is lost. As I mentioned, it's very unfortunate that this debate has become politicised by some, and obviously that includes some members of this council. The most important outcome from this council is the tangible and real efforts that we've made to combat climate change here. I've listed those earlier, and I am truly proud of those. And I think that outcome matters more than the terminology we use. But I would be disappointed for a council that's taken all of those really important steps to shy away from using the terminology that we should be. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. So I'll put the motion. Those for the amendment? Councillor Con, Councillor Mack. Those against the amendment? Councillors Doxey, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Vanderven. Oh, Councillor Stusby, you were for as well. Sorry, you missed. You're not on the main screen. You're on my small screen here. No worries. So I'll repeat that. For the amendment, Councillor Con, Councillor Mack, Councillor Stutchbury. Against the amendment, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, and Councillor King and Councillor Vanderven. So the amendment is lost, and we revert to the original motion. Do we have any speakers for?
Mr. Mayor, I move that the motion be put.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderven. Happy to put the motion. Those for the motion?
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to sum up debate if I could.
Well, we're just putting a motion that the motion be put, Councillor Thurley, at this point. So those that want the motion to be put, could you indicate, please? That's Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Vanderven, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack, Councillor Thurley. Those against the motion being put, Councillor King and Councillor Glacken and Councillor Con. So the motion is being put. On that note, I'm putting the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Vanderven, Councillor Stutchbury.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order.
Point of order.
We had a vote. We had a vote. Well, we do one point of order at a time, shall we? We did a vote. We had a vote on whether to put the motion. That was carried.
Yes.
The correct procedure now is that Councillor Thurley is given the opportunity to speak in closing his motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Okay, Councillor Thurley.
Point of order. Sorry, Mr. Mack. Mayor Mack. Are we able to speak against the original motion at any point or not?
You can, but you can have an opportunity now if you like. But the
No,
motion
on the point of order, Mr. Mayor, on the point of order, that is completely not the correct procedure. A motion has been proposed by Councillor Vanderven and carried that the motion be put. The only thing that can occur after that, and having been
Is the
successfully
person
carried.
finishing the speech? Yes, thank you,
Correct.
councillor Cameron.
So your answer to Councillor King there is not correct.
You didn't give me a chance to give him an answer, councillor Cameron, so we should sit back and desist. I said I'm happy for councillor Thurley to tidy up debate. The motion has been decided to be put. Thank you, councillor Cameron, for your elucidation. Councillor Thurley, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know why anyone is suspicious of why I put this motion at this time. A councillor has the right to put a motion at any time. I've put this motion because of a number of things that we've heard, for example, from our federal government about weakened environmental laws, about their energy policies. They have none. And we as a council need to state very clearly to our community what our position is. And I believe this motion does it. Yes, it does not use the word emergency, but it says in the strongest terms that climate change is a significant issue for our community and for the country and the world. And I want to see us bring all of the members of our community along. And I've tried to word the motion so that I can get maximum support out in the public to commit to these things and to support the council to implement these measures. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Thurley. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillors Doxey, councillor Thurley, councillor Con, councillor Stutchbury, councillor King. Will you stop moving the screens, Brad? I've lost all the people on the screen now. Can we have a full screenshot without the minutes up, please, Terence? Thank you. I'll start again. Putting the motion, those for, councillor Doxey, councillor Thurley, councillor Con, councillor Stutchbury, councillor Vanderman, councillor Glacken and councillor Cameron. Those against, councillor King. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Terence. CM10, presentation and deputation. There are none. CM 11 minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee on the 5th of May. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receives, notes and accepts the minutes and recommendations of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on the 5th of May 2020.
Thank you, councillor Thurley. The seconder is councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Very briefly, Mr. Mayor, there are a couple of things in the report which should be highlighted, and they even go back to a previous motion. The education centre at the landfill is almost complete now, and this is a big, big plus for our community to enable people to see the effects of waste and how you can change things. The other one, which is at much more personal level, we have this cloth nappy rebate scheme for local families. And I'm not sure how big the take-up has been, but at the last meeting of the committee, there have already been significant take-up, and I'd encourage people in the community to contact council and see if there's anything is still available in that mode. A brilliant initiative by council.
Thank you, councillor Thurley. There being no further questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, councillor Thurley, councillor Con, councillor Stutchbury, councillor Vanderman, councillor King, councillor Glacken, councillor Cameron and councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Documents for sealing. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to move the recommendation as a motion that council authorises its seals to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. A Albury City Crown Lands licence to Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, Gilbert Park Air Monitoring Station, 5-year term, file 14/02239. Thank you.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to speak to that at all?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. No question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, councillor Thurley, councillor Cohen, councillor Stutchbury, councillor Glacken, councillor Vanderman, councillor King, councillor Cameron and councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Thank you. Now up to 13.1, the development application 10.2019.37076.1, 595 Keilor Street. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I apologies to all, but I would like to move an amended motion, which has only come to me during this evening. I would like to move that council agree that the Marami old motel be demolished, but that the new development, decision on the new development be deferred.
Okay, so we need to get that up on the board.
Have we provided that anyway?
No.
Yeah. Well, we'll need reasons for refusal, which we.
So Councillor Stutch, have you got any background or reasons for refusal in terms of the recommendation?
Reasons for approval.
Reason for the approval of the recommendation?
Well, the reasons would come out in the debate, but if you want to put a reason for it, the reason would be that the preservation of the site would lead to almost 100% certainty of it becoming permanently damaged and burnt down by squatters, and that the cost of the rehabilitation of the site is so expensive that no future developer would approach it.
Yeah, no, it's a debate. Yeah. We're just looking for the, we've got that there, Terence.
We're just taking a pause, Councillor Stutch, before we start. He's looking for a seconder. So, reason would the amenity and safety and amenity of the site.
I'll start a hotel.
Yes, so we'll need to reword the. Just a moment, councillors. We're just pulling the motion together.
While we're waiting, could I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councillor Cameron.
Through you to the General Manager. Given that this is a motion, or the item of business is to approve or not approve a development application, is it possible to make carte blanche positions as this motion would appear to require? What I mean is that there's a development application before us which either has to be refused or consented to with various conditions possibly. But is it possible to simply say we give a carte blanche approval for future, presumably future applications that have not yet been made to demolish the site, yet we defer making a decision on any other element? Is that in order?
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's not in order. I was just speaking to the Mayor on that particular issue, Councillor Cameron. So the options for us going forward are, in terms of Councillor Stutchbury's proposed motion, is to approve the demolition and the proposal that's before us in terms of the development application in toto. The other option would be one, refusal as has been recommended, or two, to defer the application for further consideration.
So in relation to the current motion, Councillor Stutchbury, it contradicts itself because it doesn't give a way forward in relation to the proposed DA, which is the second part of the motion. So it's either defer entirely or propose that demolition be allowed and the development consent issued in relation to the proposed buildings that are in the DA. So that's clearly the only way forward with your motion if you choose to take either option.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cameron, for your expert interpretation of the council rules of meeting conduct, which is indeed encyclopedic. Mr. Mayor, I would like to amend my amendment that it just reads that council agrees that the Marami old hotel to be demolished. Full stop.
Yeah, no,
but you can't because it's the same issue. You can't.
Okay, and that the proposed DA goes.
We'll just get. I'll get the motion up for you.
We'll get the motion up for you. We'll couple it together and.
Just coming up with the one that might mean. Sorry, Councillor Stutchbury, through you, Mr. Mayor. We just proposing a motion on the screen that may cover off what it is you're seeking to do, Councillor Stutchbury.
That looks way better than what I could have said.
It's up on the screen now.
Nice for you.
Yep, I like it. Yep.
Okay, so could you read that out for me, Councillor Stutchbury, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Zachnich, and thank you, Councillor Cameron. I move that Council A receives and notes the contents of this report and B grants development consent to development application 10.219.37076.1 proposing multi-dwelling housing, 4 attached residences and garages, front fence, 5 lot community title subdivision and demolition of residence, shed and tree removal, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included at attachment 1 to this resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. We got there. A seconder, Councillor King. Okay, Councillor Stutchbury, no questions at this point, so you can start your debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your forbearance on the difficult birth of this amendment, but it did only come to me during the public forum that preceded this council. Look, this is an extremely difficult decision for all of us, and I would just like to state at the outset that I, for one, am certainly not in favour of demolishing historic buildings. You can't replace history, and the Marami Old Motel has been around since 1890-ish. But unfortunately, it has been beset by very poor previous council decisions. So there was a poor council decision in 1951 when consent was granted to do the renovations and additions to the building. And these renovations and additions to the building have both damaged the building almost beyond the ability for anyone to afford to repair it, and have also detracted from the appearance of the building. And we all love history. Well, I hope we all do. But we also love history that looks good. And the old Marami Motel don't look good. From the street, it looks terrible. So the 1951 additions have caused damage, which is almost irreparable, and has also made it look plain dog ugly. Then the second council decision, which was particularly appalling, and I do not believe that it would be made today by this current council, which has demonstrated that it is a progressive council, which is open to all sorts of modern ways of thinking. I do not believe the current council would have approved the motel development that resulted in the subdivision of the block, resulting in the old Marami motel lying on a very, very small block and a particularly unappealing motel now being next door to it in, I might add, a heritage area. So what are we left with? We are left with, I think, two options. Option one is to say, no, this is a heritage building and we should not demolish it because of its history. And in fact, I can see much merit in that argument. Option two is to say, well, the original historic building has been hideously modified to the point where it's almost unrecognisable and unusable and unlivable, and that it needs to just be taken down and something else built. Now, it's clear to all of you from my initial amendment that I don't much like what's been offered in place of it, but my original argument stands that the old Marami motel has been modified beyond recognition, and the damage that has been caused by the modification and then the subsequent damage through water intrusion and squatting and the rest of it has rendered it uneconomic for any developer to purchase and develop. And so therefore, using my crystal ball, I can see that should my amendment fail, the building will further deteriorate to the point of being absolutely unrepairable. And we already have in our reports, dilapidation reports, etc. And that the cost of repairing and rehabilitating and restoring this building, which at the present time is estimated conservatively to be $1.5 million, will in fact be much higher. And ultimately, the building will probably be accidentally or deliberately burnt down and therefore will be lost forever. So therefore, if you agree to my amended motion and it is voted for successfully, then the historic building as it stands will be recorded for posterity, presumably in photographic form, and possibly some of its features might be taken away and placed in a museum, and then something useful and more appealing than the current terrible state of the building will replace it. You will notice in my debate, I hope that I have really not mentioned the developers very much, nor the new development, because I think that they are irrelevant. What is relevant to this debate is what we have staring at us in our faces right now, which is an historic building that has been really defaced significantly on two separate occasions by previous iterations of this council, and the option of getting rid of it now and replacing it with something better before it is left to crumble into the ground or be burnt to the ground. Thank you very much for your time, councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaking against, Councillor Blacken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I foreshadow that should this motion be lost, that I will move an alternative which would be substantially the same, if not very similar to that in our readings tonight. I believe that this is very much about not just what is there, the old Marami Hotel, and what has been a significant building in our community for generations, but also about what would replace it. Because the reality is that the request is to demolish on the grounds that they want to place something else there. So it is very much about those two components. I just can't agree with Councillor Stutchbury when he says that the building looks terrible. It only looks terrible in his views, or in his words, terrible, because of the additions and the superficial age and appearance of the facade at the moment of the original and substantive part of the building. And that's because it's just not currently lived in and the garden's not upkept. It's not in a terrible condition because of significant renovations. There has been very little work done on the original first and then second part of the old Marami Hotel, so the very front, and the part that would date back to 1896. And then the large section at the back, which was built either at the same time or very closely thereafter, which would have had the kitchens, has an enormous cellar underneath it. And so that's a very old part, and it was joined down the middle. So perhaps the joining down the middle of those two significant components and indeed the various parts of the building that were added on in 1951, I think it was. When those parts were added, yes, I agree, they're significant additions and they're not worthy of retention. But I do not believe that we should be considering that the main and significant part of the building is significantly dilapidated or in significant condition that it needs to be demolished. I do not believe, having actually been in that building itself, that the original, if not the original and then after original components of that building, are in significant dilapidation. Yes, I agree with the components added later, the 1950s parts, those bathrooms that were added for the use of such large numbers of people who were staying there. But the rest of the building, that original part of the building, I believe is significant and in the community of Albury has significant history, and that it is largely and substantially sound and could be renovated. Not the whole lot, I agree. It would be not wise to, or I don't think we should wish them to retain the 1950s parts, but I do believe the other part of the building, the original, should be maintained and should not be demolished. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gluckin. We have any other speakers for or another speaker against? No speakers for. Councillor Con speaking against. No questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this decision is fairly straightforward for me. We're debating an item that was separately listed as a heritage item in the LEP. That decision was made by people who are far more qualified in heritage assessment than I am. And tonight we've also heard from the president of the local historical society about the value of this building. I understand from the assessment that it would be theoretically possible to renovate and restore this building. It's very unfortunate that that's not currently feasible for the current owners, or that the current market is not conducive to that happening. But our decision as elected representatives has to be, if we're listing an item as a heritage item, that we can't support its demolition if another option is available. Why would we list items otherwise? If the state of the building is given as an excuse for its demolition, then what's to stop other owners of heritage listed properties in future from allowing them to become dilapidated so that they can get permission to demolish it? There's no way that I can support that argument. I think it's very unfortunate that the current owners haven't found a good use for this building. You know, those 1950s additions are awful, but I'd love to see a renovation of this building where those additions can be removed and those parts of the building that have heritage value can be put to good use for this community. I hope it's not longer than a few more years, but we can't make a decision based on the current owner's inability to fund a renovation that is theoretically possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There are no further speakers for, so I have 2 speakers against. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've circulated a foreshadowed motion which includes a slight amendment to the recommendation in our business papers to councillors and staff. I hope that may be given some consideration in due course. My sentiments are very similar. My mother was born in this building as an aside during World War II. I won't name the year lest she becomes offended, but it was during the Second World War. But that doesn't form any part of my consideration, and nor should it, of these issues. I met lots of people in Albury, and as was mentioned by the Historical Society gentlemen, that have connections to this building in passing or directly. It is a difficult situation. I really don't like telling people what they can and can't do with their own property. It's a very dictatorial part of local government, and I find it to be so. And I'm very uncomfortable exercising these sort of or refusing development consent. However, I have to agree with what Councillor Con said, that dilapidation is a very dangerous precedent or reason to approve a development consent, because it's totally in the control of the owner, usually, although financially it may not be. This was a place that was fit for human habitation 4 or 5 years ago and was commercially used for that. Yet today it is so bad that the argument is being made that we should approve a DA because of the consequences of that dilapidation. If a future, in an ideal world, if it was economically possible and a future DA came before this council, and unless there's new information came to light, that had the removal of all the post-1951 or 55 fixtures, the demolition of all that and in the outlying buildings, and the provision of units that were perhaps in some sort of, matching style, federations type style, I'd be delighted to support that proposition and retain the original core building of Marami. I'd be delighted to retain that. But this is a building but what's being proposed in this DA I can't support. This is a building of significant historical importance in Albury. And I think we have a moral responsibility as a council that if we're going to say to this couple, we won't let you do what you need to do to realise some sort of return on what is your property, then I think it's only fair that council needs to consider its options around possibly acquiring the property and finding a use for the property. Now, there's no commitment intended with that, but in the part C that I've inserted into the recommendation in the motion I hope to move later tonight, I propose that the General Manager shall cause a report to come back to Council, canvassing the options for Council to acquire the property and potential uses by Council of the property. If things are as dire as we're being told, it might be financially feasible for Council to acquire the property. That's a future decision for Council potentially to make. But I think morally, if we're going to say to people in this circumstance, look, you're between a rock and a hard place. There's no way out for you unless we let you demolish it, but we won't let you demolish it. I think morally we need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. There are no speakers for. I have Councillor King wishing to speak against and Councillor Doxey.
I'll just make it short. This is one of those things that you can't unscramble the egg once it's done. And other councillors might have noted an email that I forwarded off regarding alternative uses for the premises. And I really encourage the council staff to work with the owner if they do decide to do something with it that's not residential, to explore things such as parking and those sort of things if it became a commercial residence. And I certainly appreciate that the owners, inherited this building. They're concerned with what they've got to do with it. It's like a millstone around their neck, I suppose. But it's one of those things. Again, you can't unscramble it. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Thank you, Councillor King. A question from Councillor Glacken before I take Councillor Dock, who's speaking against. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. I made a few notes during the presentations before the council meeting, but I'd just like to clarify something about dates, if I could, please. So my understanding is that the current owners purchased the property in 1999, and Councillor Con has said that it reminded us all that it's on the heritage list and it's itemised individually. Can I confirm, and I think Mr. Christie gave a date, when was that heritage listing attached to that building? Was it before 1999 and therefore they purchased it during that, or was it after?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Good question.
Thank you.
Mr. Christie?
Yep, and thank you for the question. And for you, Mr. Mayor, while I won't have the precise date on my head, I do know that our 1995 LEP, which was converted in April 1996, had it on our heritage listing. So at the very least, it was listed in 1996, which is obviously prior to 1999. It may well have been listed on the previous LEP to that, which was in the mid to late 80s.
Okay, so it was definitely known as a heritage listed. Thank you very much. That's perfect.
Thanks, Councillor Glacken. Speaking against, Councillor Doxey, no speakers for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unlike Councillor Stutchbury, I don't have a problem with this decision. It is not a tough decision for me. History is most important to me. And just to reflect on the submission from the Albury and District Historical Society in their relevance of the history of the site to Albury and a lot of our current residents. But let's go back to when the owners, present owners, purchased the site. They knew at that stage that it was heritage listed, and a heritage listed property or building is always going to be an issue for you. This is not something you can just put onto the market in the Border Mail. This is something that's going to need a fair bit of organisation and to consolidate a group of people that are likely to do credit to a restoration of the facility. There are other options, and I cannot support the motion before us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There appears to be no further speakers or questions. Councillor Stutchbury, you're happy to close debate on your motion? Thanks.
Oh, it gives me tremendous honour, Mr. Mayor, to close debate on an amendment to a motion where the seconder of the motion has spoken against it. There's not much to say, really. My concern is that, look, first of all, I agree that Marami is an historic building and I would very much love to see it preserved. My problem is that should the original motion be successful and the demolition be prevented from taking place, that the residence, the structure, the building will remain unoccupied, will remain squatted upon, will deteriorate further, and will in fact be deliberately or accidentally burnt down. I liked what I heard from Councillor Cameron, and so whilst speaking for my own motion, I'm also encouraged by some of what I've heard from my fellow councillors. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. On that note, I'll put the motion. Those for the motion, Councillor Stutchbury. Those against the motion, Councillors Doxey, Thurley, Van der Ven, Con, Glacken, King, Cameron and Mack. So which one am I going to, Councillor Cameron or Councillor Glacken in relation to the foreshadowed motion?
So Glacken was first.
Councillor Glacken, you were first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to take point C on from Councillor, who was it? Councillor Cameron. If he's happy for me to move that way on the basis that it, as he explained to us when speaking against that previous motion, is that it doesn't really lock council into anything. It simply opens up a possible opportunity. How that will play out or may play out may become irrelevant. And so I'm happy to move that way.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you happy with that?
Yes, and I'd welcome the chance to second that motion of councillor Glackens.
Thank you, councillor Cameron.
Glacken. So did you want to move your motion, councillor Glacken?
Yes, thank you. I'll take this one on for you, councillor Cameron.
That was my cunning plan.
Okay. Well, I would like to move that Council A receive the contents of the report and B resolve to refuse to grant development consent to DA 10.2019.37076.1 lodged on 12 September 2019 for demolition of residence shed and tree removal and construction of multi-dwelling housing, 4 attached residences and garages, front fence and 5-lot community title subdivision for the following reasons. I'll let the staff know if I can when they should move it up. Thank you very much. The proposed demolition of the old Marami Hotel has not been adequately justified. It is not considered to be the only option available to the building and is therefore inconsistent with the objective of clause 5.10 of Albury LEP Plan 2010, specifically objective A, to conserve the environmental heritage of Albury, and B, to conserve the heritage significance of heritage items and heritage conservation areas, including associated fabric settings and views. And the development is therefore contrary to the provision of section 4.15 1A1I of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. 2, assessment of the application under the matters for consideration provided in part 7.4.2 of the Albury Development Control Plan 2010 concludes that proposed demolition would negatively impact the Y Street precinct and the Bonegilla Conservation Area by the loss of a significant item of environmental heritage within the conservation area, and the development is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 4.151A3 of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979. And yes, you can move that up, please. Thank you. 3, the proposed demolition of the old Marami Hotel is contrary to the provisions of part 7.5.1 and part C1 to 7, Y Street Precinct Controls 4 and 5, in that the development would have a detrimental impact on the streetscape of this part of the Bonegilla Heritage Conservation Area and the setting of other items of environmental heritage located in close proximity to the site, and the development is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 4.151A3 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And 4, approval of the development would undermine the community's expectations and aspirations for the conservation of the heritage assets of the city as expressed in the heritage controls and requirement contained within Albury Local Environmental Plan 2010 and the Albury Development Control Plan 2010, which would not be in the public interest and is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 4.151E of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And I'd like to add C, please. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. The Chief Executive Officer shall cause a report to come before Council to detail the options for Council to possibly acquire and possible use by Albury City of the property. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Cameron, you happy to second?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to open debate on the motion?
Yes, very, very briefly. As has quite rightly been pointed out by a number of councillors during our last debate as just had, this is a significant building and you cannot unscramble that egg, Councillor King. You're absolutely correct with that. Once it's gone, it's gone. It would be, one could say it's along the lines of death by 1,000 cuts for the heritage items within our community. Yes, there were a lot of other older buildings within our community that have been razed. And at some point, we need to accept that we either do them all or we retain some of them. This building has been on that listing for a significant period of time. The people purchased that building knowingly. It is unfortunate, and I agree with the other councillors who have raised this. It is unfortunate that they have not been able to achieve what they have wanted to do with it. But that building is the significant part that we have an issue with. I won't talk about what would replace it because to me, that's the less important part. It is the building itself, the old Marami Hotel. That is one of the most significant buildings in Albury, and we need to be mindful of that. And we need to help try and find a way forward. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Gluckin. Are there any other speakers for or against? No speakers against, but I have a speaker for, councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The issue for me is, and I think the most telling submission from my perspective over this whole issue was in the report with Mr. and Mrs. West across the road. And I think if you read that through, from my perspective, that was the most telling submission for me. Councillor Con also mentioned earlier that 5 years of neglect is no reason for requiring demolition. If I had an asset like this that was being used successfully in 2015 or up to 2015 for student accommodation, I would have tried like hell to make sure that there were similar uses for that building in the subsequent years, and not just left it, to be derelict and to use that as an excuse for demolition of what is clearly a significant heritage item within Albury City Council. So that's why I support this particular motion. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Vanderman. There appears to be no other speakers or questions. Councillor Gladden, do you wish to close debate on your motion? Thanks.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour: Councillor Doxey, Councillor Gladden, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Con, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, and I'm missing Councillor Stutchbury on the screen. There he is. He's for. Councillor Stutchbury is for the motion. So the motion is passed. Thank you, councillors. Okay, 13.2, development application 10.2019.3593.2 Pembina Street. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an alternate motion which I submitted earlier today. If that could be put on the board, please.
Yeah, I think that's it, is it?
No, it's coming.
It's coming. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I ask a question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
there's someone's appeared on the screen, Peter Emptage. Appears to, thank you.
No, gone.
Thank you.
Councillor, I can bring that to our attention. I can't even get everyone on my screen.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you, Councillor
Early.
Start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receives and notes the contents of this report. B, that council declines to modify development consent number 10.2018.35932.1 for dual occupancy development 1 additional residence, garage and studio, 2 lot Torrens Sidle subdivision, boundary adjustment and consolidation of lots 1 and 2, DP 726722, and lot 1 DP 16443 for the following reasons. 1, the development as constructed is not substantially the same as the development approved by development consent 10.2018.35932.1 and is therefore contrary to the provision of section 4.55 of the Environment Planning Assessment Act 1979. The development as constructed detrimentally impacts the amenity of the neighbouring property in the west and is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 4.151B of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And 3, the non-compliance with the development consent and approved plans are significant, and approval of such non-compliances would undermine the confidence of the community in the planning process, which is contrary to the provisions of section 415(1)(e) of the Environment Planning and Assessment Act 19. And can you move the screen up for me, please? And C, that council notes that following determination of this application, the team leader education and compliance will 1, lodge an official complaint with the building professional board in regard to the actions of the principal certifying authority and the private certifier. 2, issue a compliance order under section 9.34 and part 1 of Schedule 5 of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979, requiring the owner, developer and builder to fully comply with Development Consent 10.2018-35932.1, including undertaking any and all works required to achieve compliance with the development as approved. And 3, issue penalty infringement notices to the developer, owner and the builder for undertaking work which was non-compliant with the development consent and the construction certificate issued for the development.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to open debate on your motion? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. If I go right back to the original application, even then there were problems with privacy, overlooking and other aspects. And when the developer was asked, he lodged amended plans which showed fixed screens and has therefore addressed concerns raised in any potential overlooking. So it was understood that this was a problem. The developer understood it and the developer undertook to fix the problem. But then we get into the guts of this matter. And I'll quote something from the report. The constructed development was not consistent with the approved DA plans. It was further noted that the construction certificate plans issued by the private certifier differed substantially from the approved DA plans. It was further found that the development as constructed varied from the construction certificate plans. So we seem to have 3 sets of plans. One wonders how this can happen. We're also told in another part of the report, other building changes include the reconfiguration of a number of windows and doors, which have occurred during the building construction. These things don't just occur, they are deliberately set in place by someone. Either that person was incompetent and was unable to read plans, or they were reading the wrong plans. And we already know that there were 3 sets of plans involved. So I don't believe that we can approve this where a developer gets an approval and then does something completely different and comes back to us asking us to give retrospective consent to what has been built. I believe that he must be made to restore it to the status of the original approved DA. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Question from Councillor Vandervan. I have a speaker for and no speakers against. Councillor Vandervan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff and obviously also to Councillor Thurley. One of the biggest issues in tonight's forum was the issue of the encroachment. Now, how does Councillor Thurley's motion currently deal with that issue? Or do we need another item on the motion to make sure that the issue of encroachment is resolved even with forcing the developers to go back to the original approved DA?
Mr Christie, thank you.
Thank you for the question and for you, Mr Mayor. The retaining wall, which is the subject of the dispute around the encroachment, is a new element that's added as part of the modification. It wasn't part of the original consent. So therefore, if we revert back to the original consent, the retaining wall by default is refused and therefore would need to be removed, and therefore the encroachment issue would be resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gleichen, I have a speaker against now. Councillor King. Councillor King.
Yes, look, whilst in principle I agree with the fact that people can't just build places how they like, I'm very, very cautious of the second part of the amendment, so the motion regarding that the council direct people to issue penalty notices, direct letters to be written to boards. I don't think that's our power, and I just think we're setting up a very slippery slope in regards to this. And what we've heard from a lot of presentations tonight is a lot of variables in all this, and I'm really concerned that we might be jumping the gun a bit here.
Thank you, councillor King. Councillor Blacken speaking for.
Sorry.
Mr. Zachnich, you wish to speak?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr Mayor. Can I just clarify that point? So the motion from councillor Thurley in relation to point C is simply asking council to note the fact that officers will exercise their delegation in terms of lodging the complaint, issuing compliance and penalty infringement notices. It's not directing officers to do that. It will be an action as a result of council's resolution. So simply noting that.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Councillor Blacken, you've been very patient speaking for.
That's all good, and thank you very much. Yes, to speak for this motion of councillor Thurley's. Someone raised in a question when we had our pre-meeting presentations this evening, and the question was around the perception of overlooking, and asked for clarification. Is there such a thing as perception of overlooking? Well, personally, I think that's somewhat irrelevant, because the reality is those windows ought not to be there. The building that we, or as council, gave building permission to and for has not been built. So some concept of perception of overlooking, I don't think that's really relevant. We need to be looking at, has the building that planning permission was given for, the development application was granted for, has that been built? It hasn't been built. And the issues of the boundaries, whether we, someone gave examples of their own property and the boundaries that they're built on, and asked how often are those boundaries right, or how often are boundaries found to be wrong over time. Again, that's irrelevant. Either the boundary is correct or it's not. And if it's not correct, then it needs to be dealt with. Doesn't matter how often that happens. In this instance, it is wrong. In this instance, the building has not been built as the development application was granted for. I believe that we need to allow them to rectify those issues and raise the issues in accordance with the professional standards, because these are professionals who have allowed this to happen for whatever reason. It will be, or it should be, investigated, and whatever outcome comes from that, we need to accept as council. But the reality is that building has not been built in accordance with how it should have been built. And I think this way forward enables that to be rectified, for the boundary issues to be resolved, for the building to be returned to what it, or rebuilt as what it should have been built as, and then the matter will be resolved and we can move on, other than the referral of these issues to the appropriate professional bodies for them to investigate and deal with in accordance with their regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blacken. There are no speakers for, against, or questions. Councillor Doxey speaking for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is simply a slap in the face of we councillors who approved the original DA. There's no other way around it. If we as a council do not put our foot down now against these illegal actions, we would send the wrong message to our community. Let's not drag this out any longer and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There appears to be no further speakers for or against. Any questions? No? Okay. Councillor Thurley, just to close debate on your motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think enough has been said. The structure that exists now does not conform at all to the original DA. And given that in the original DA, the privacy and overlooking of the neighbours was a significant concern, and that was acknowledged by the developer, this building cannot be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour: Councillor Doxey, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Con, Councillor Blacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack. Those against are Councillor King. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, Wagira Trail pedestrian bridges. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation as a motion that council accepts a tender from Cable Bridge Constructions for contract number 19/04547 Wagira Trail pedestrian bridges for the lump sum amount of $464,430, including GST.
Thank you, councillor Vanderman. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, just to speak to the motion.
Look, just briefly, Mr. Mayor, I think that this is a fantastic project, and I think the successful tenderer, it was a no-brainer from the point of view of the fact that that's what they do. The way that we wanted the design was the cable bridges, and that it was the only tender within the the estimated council budget, and I think it's great value for council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Vanderman. Question from councillor Glacken.
Thank you. I'm happy with the motion put forward by councillor Vandervan, but it's simply a matter of some of the content of the report. I've just got to find the right section, sorry. If we could, and to the most relevant member of staff, my page 64 of 148, in fact, yeah, both pages are 64. There's in the qualitative assessment, there's the section of local benefit. Now, Cable Bridge Constructions and Northeast Civil Constructions are in, I believe, from memory, Porepunkah and Bright, but local benefit is 1 and 6. Can I seek clarification as to what those local benefit components were, please?
Thank you. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Predominantly, the majority of the local benefit for Northeast Civil Construction was around that 90% of labour, 75% of labour and 90% of materials and plant being sourced from the local region, and was based on some of that plus sponsorship of local sporting communities within the local region.
And the reverse, the 1, score of 1?
My understanding was that the majority of Cable Bridge Construction labour and materials was to be sourced outside of the region, and I don't think that they supported any local government or support any sporting or community groups. Sorry.
Okay.
Correction on that. The report says that the company did not indicate that they support or sponsor local sporting groups.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Councillor Glacken.
Yeah, if I could seek further clarification then. The same area. The Cable Bridge Constructions then, when you say the labour is going to be sourced from outside the area, are they going to ship people in, or would they be from Porepunkah, which I would think would be our area?
Mr. Lawson.
Thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that they were, the labour was sourced from Porepunkah area in that region.
Okay, and so the Bright organisation, they weren't bringing Bright people in then, they were going to use Albury people, were they?
That was the indication that was provided within the submission.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Glacken. Any further questions? No speakers for. Happy to have the speaker sum up the motion. It was councillor Vanderman?
Yes.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cohen, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. The Goona Oval Sporting Pavilion, contract number 19/03873. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council A accepts the tender from the Adaptive Trust TA Design for the design and construct contract number 19/03873 for Goona Oval Sporting Pavilion for the lump sum amount of $2,521,420, including GST. B, reallocates 192,500, including GST, from the Les O'Brien Terrace Seating Project to the Gooner Oval Sporting Pavilion Project as part of the March quarterly review. C, authorises the CEO to work with a successful contractor to identify any potential savings in the design. D, allocates at a quarterly budget review in the 2021 financial year any shortfall in project delivery cost following the implementation of recommendations. And E, continues to seek a financial contribution from the AFL for the project.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Seconder is Councillor Doxey. Happy to second?
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open debate? Thank you.
Very briefly, Mr Mayor, I mean, this is another great project and it's something that needs to be done. The group itself has already committed to doing a lot of work out there. Got a loan from council, so it's vibrant, it's ongoing, well worth doing this project.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. It's stated in the report that the Adaptive Trust trading as Design with a Z is a local company, but in fact, there's no further detail in the report. How local are they, please? As in, what might their business address be or something similar? Thank you.
Mr Lawson, can you answer that question, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor. I don't have the address of the company off the top of my head, but can certainly provide that to councillors following the meeting. But their submission indicated that they were Albury based.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, happy with that? Thank you. There's been no further question or debate. Happy to close debate. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Nothing more to say, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Claggett, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Draft CBD parking strategy 13.5. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council receives and endorses the draft CBD parking strategy 2020-2025 to be placed on public exhibition. B, place the draft CBD parking strategy on public exhibition for a minimum of 28 days. And C, if no submissions are received, that the draft CBD parking strategy 2020-2025 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Con.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to the motion? Thanks.
Look, Mr Mayor, we've had discussions in pre-briefing sessions. I think we've got a good document to get on public display, and I would rather wait for any debate to see what the public says. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey, you wish to speak for the motion?
No, I thought we voted. Sorry, Mr Mayor.
No, you're just shooting. Okay, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Clayton, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Okay, 13.6, Draft Regional Natural Environment Strategy. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receives and endorses the draft Regional Natural Environment Strategy and supporting documents. B, places the draft Regional Natural Environment Strategy and supporting documents on public exhibition for a minimum of 28 days to allow for further community consultation. And C, if no submissions are received, that the draft Regional Natural Environment Strategy and supporting documents be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Oh, look, only briefly. A huge amount of work has gone into this behind the scenes by our staff and also by our members of our Sustainability Advisory Committee. This is a fantastic opportunity for the Two Cities, One Community partnership when it was first mooted. Obviously, our local threatened species have no interest in state borders. So collaborating on this, I think, is a fantastic opportunity, and I look forward to hearing the submissions from the public. Thanks.
Thank you, councillor Con. There's been no further speakers for or against. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour, councillor Doxy, councillor Con, councillor Gladwin, councillor Cameron, councillor Thurley, councillor Vanderman, councillor King, councillor Stutchbury and councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Draft Smart Community Strategy 2020. Thank you, councillors. We have councillor Cameron.
I'd like to move that Council A endorse the draft Smart Community Strategy. B, places the draft Smart Community Strategy on public exhibition for a minimum of 28 days, subject to formal endorsement from Wodonga Council. And C, if no submissions are received, adopts the strategy as presented.
Thank you, councillor Cameron. Councillor Gladwin.
Sorry, a little slow on the microphone there. Very happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? I just one for Imogen. Is that your wallpaper there or is it sunny in Myrtleford?
Good pickup. It's always sunny in Myrtleford.
Okay.
Well, at 9 o'clock
Happy
at
to
night.
put the motion. All those in favour. Councillor Doxy, Councillor Con, Councillor Gladwin, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Mack. Those against? Councillor King, did you vote then or? And Councillor King and Councillor Stutchbury. I haven't got you on my screen again. You've dropped off. No. Is Councillor Stutchbury on the screen somewhere so I can determine his vote?
He's there. He's just got a blank screen, which is why you can't see him probably.
Councillor Stutchbury, could you indicate by audio if you're voting for or against the motion? Thanks.
I think he's gone over Twinkle.
Actually, I think he's working, and I think he gets called away.
Yes, that's quite correct. He's on
Accept
call.
that, without a vote, we'll pass the motion on that note. Motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. The March quarter budget review 13.8. Thank you, councillors. There is Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council A receives and adopts the revised budget estimates for the 2019-2020 financial year. B, approves the provision of a 10-year interest-free loan of $60,000 to the Albury Wodonga Equestrian Centre. And C, authorises the drawdown of $11.2 million in budgeted loans during the 2019-2020 financial year.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Stutchbury, you return.
I have indeed returned, and I've returned specifically to second this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Appears to be no further speakers or questions. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxy, Councillor Con, Councillor Gladwin, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vandervan, Councillor King, Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Officers' reports for noting 14.1 monthly development statistic for April 2020. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gladwin.
Thank you. To move through you, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation is a motion that council receives and notes the information in the monthly development statistics report for April 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doxy.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gladwin, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Only if there's questions. If there's no, yep, Councillor
I've got a question. So, yeah. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me the opportunity of asking a question on this motion. My question is to the relevant member of staff. Can he please update council on how the DA for 447 Reed Avenue, Lavington is progressing, and are there any objections to this DA? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Christie, are you there?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you for the question and for you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, there are, overall, there have been 11 objections received to 447 Reed Avenue. That's over 2 submission periods. There are 8 submissions received in the first period and 3 submissions received in the second period after changes have been made. At this stage, council staff are just finalising our assessment and we are planning to send it to council for determination. at this stage, whether it's the 9th of June or 22nd of June will just depend on our ability to finalise the determination in the next day or two. If it will be 9th of June, if not, it'll be the 22nd of June.
Thank you, Mr. Christie. Your follow-up, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My follow-up question is really what is the substance of the 11 submissions, which would all appear to be negative to the development? Could that be given to us in summary form, please?
Mr. Christie.
Yeah, and thank you for the question for you, Mr. Mayor. If I was to summarise them, there's concern around design and streetscape impacts. There's concern around increased traffic, storage of rubbish bins, the number of dwellings proposed, the overall number of unit developments in the vicinity related to the number of dwellings, the number of dwellings within one building, that the concerns that there's not bollards to protect the adjoining fence to the east, concerns around the design of the development and the perceived low-cost nature, about ongoing maintenance in regards to the units, and then overall impacts upon the amenity of the area from a number of high density or medium density living units. Described. They're the words of the objectives in summary.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Christie. Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to open debate on this motion?
No, I believe the report is fine and Councillor Stutchbury's questions are just fine. So thank you very much. Happy for it to be put.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Thurley, Councillor Doxey, Councillor King, Councillor Van der Ven, Councillor Con, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, we're up to the 2019-20 Works Program. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Van der Ven.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the motion that council receives and notes the status of the 2019-20 Works Program as at 31 March 2020.
Thank you, councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Van der Ven. Do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, to be honest, it's reasonably. Look, I'll make a few comments. First of all, there have been significant projects added to the Works Program in the first 9 months of this financial year, and I'm presuming that that's caused our overall total, which should be at 75%, to be nearly 10% or a bit under that. Short of where we should be. I hope that some of it can be caught up in the next period in this 3 months that we're in. But understanding there have been some issues around COVID-19 and other issues with weather that might prevent that from happening. Perhaps some comment from Mr. Lawson or Mr. Ferris around what their expectation is of a full year completion rate would be useful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lawson or Mr. Ferris?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the questions. So I think we've noted in the report that we'll be looking at, on the current accomplishment, looking at achieving approximately 90% of the program. There are some large contracts that are already awarded and have yet to commence, unfortunately, and will carry over into the next financial year for completion.
Just to follow up.
Yes, Councillor Van der Ven.
No, well, I didn't actually ask the question in the first place. I just opened debate. I'll leave the councillors to ask the questions.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury and then Councillor Glacken with questions, and Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for once again allowing me the opportunity to ask a question of the most relevant member of staff. And I ask this question in honour of Councillor Van der Ven, the mover of this motion. Could we please be updated as to the progress of the Wagga Road development, which was awarded to the successful tenderer on the basis that they were more likely to complete the project in a shorter amount of time than the unsuccessful tenderer? Are XL Grey Brunei progressing well, and will they be completing this task on or before time? Thank you.
Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the XL Grade Brunei have executed the program very well, and it is on track for completion as per the program. There has been a couple of minor delays with the recent inclement weather. However, they've been able to remain on track and are still programmed to be completed in June this year.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Councillor Blacken, question?
Yes, thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. And noting the comments of Councillor Van der Ven, it is, I mean, we can't help but be a little disappointed that it's not a little bit closer to the percentage that it ought to be, that 75%. And I am minded that COVID-19 was a slight factor in that period and is now a more significant factor. Hopefully we'll be coming out of that. And that has affected some components or some parts of the council. I can only imagine that there are some areas, however, where it's been quite fortuitous. And I recall reading last week, I think it was, the work planned for Swift Street, for example, that pedestrian crossing, because the traffic is light at the moment, it's intended to undertake that work, even though some of the components aren't quite ready because they haven't been worked out yet. Can I get a bit of feedback on how that plays out generally with other aspects of the works program? And have you been able to take advantage?
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, with COVID-19 affecting the amount of traffic on the road, that has been a benefit to projects, and I think has probably assisted in a number of projects being completed on program and on time. You know, there has been certainly great progress, as I mentioned before, around that Wagga Road project, but there has been some other issues around extended approvals, which has pushed the commencement date for other projects out and significantly impacted the program completion rate.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Councillor King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to the relevant member of staff. Just certainly the high profile Thurgoona Elizabeth Street intersection. You've got in your report there that the delay to the service provider and government aid transport, obviously, because we've got traffic lights there. Can you elaborate on what they're not doing to get this project going?
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, thank you for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. I think I got the question. You're breaking up a little bit. Was it around the Thurgoona Elizabeth Mitchell Drive intersection and the traffic lights?
Yeah, I'm just I'm trying to apportion why it hasn't started yet, given that we were it was awarded in February, and the same for Kerr Road. You've mentioned in your reports that you have a delay due to in utility service relocations, which I'm thinking might be electricity, and in the Thurgoona Elizabeth Mitchell Drive, you have delays due to service provider and government agency approvals, which, given that there's traffic lights there, I'm thinking it's the Transport of New South Wales reincarnation of RMS. And these are getting a bit long in the tooth now. I'm just wondering, can you elaborate on what the hold up is?
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the Elizabeth Mitchell Thurgoona Drive intersection, we were awaiting approvals from Transport for New South Wales around the traffic signals. We've now got that. We're also waiting on approval from Essential Energy to alter the electricity so that we could remove the existing street lights to undertake the works. That's now been, we've now got that approval as well. And the contractors plan to commence on site at that intersection following the Queen's birthday weekend at this stage. With regard to the Thurgoona and Kerr intersection, we were awaiting that essential energy approval for relocation of some services. However, there has been approvals to relocate Telstra and the NBN services as well. They were awarded, council might remember, they were awarded some time back, and we've been awaiting those utilities to be relocated as well.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Councillor Vanderven, you have a question?
Yeah, just noticing, maybe I've missed it or I'm somehow not seeing it somewhere, but we still don't seem to have commenced the pedestrian crossing in Swift Street. What's the problem with that particular project?
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks for the question. Essential Energy is appearing a fair bit tonight. We've also been awaiting approval around the installation of the pedestrian lights for that crossing, which are required. We still haven't received that. We're still awaiting that. That's been an ongoing approval process over the last 6 to 8 months. It seems that, they seem to be holding up a few of our works at the minute. However, as I think Councillor Blacken mentioned before, we will look at getting that work undertaken and having some of the conduiting in place so that we can install the lighting once the approvals has been received.
Is there any, Mr. Mayor, follow-up? Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we as councillors can do to assist in steering Essential Energy into a more timely response to our requests for infrastructure upgrades, removals, or re-siting?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I've made the contact middle of last week, Councillor Vanderven, directly through the community relations crew into the regional manager. So hopefully we'll get some responses fairly soon.
Yeah, to be honest, from my perspective, it's not good enough that we take so long to get what appears to be, I don't know the background, but it appears to be just a ridiculous amount of time to be waiting for an approval for a traffic light.
Yep, agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderven. Question from Councillor Cameron.
Mr. Mayor, can I just say that I'm willing to make myself available to lead a delegation of councillors to Port Macquarie to go to the headquarters of Essential Energy if required.
Thank you very much for that wonderful offer. Okay, Councillor Vanderven, no further questions. Do you wish to close debate on your motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Blacken, Councillor Con, Councillor Stuttery, Councillor King, Councillor Vanderven, Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. And we've got corporate health indicators, 14.3. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receives and notes the March 2020 corporate health indicators report.
Thank you, Councillor Stuttery.
Mr. Mayor, I've never been so happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Do you wish to speak to that motion?
Only to note the very favourable change in the lost time injury frequency rate down to 6.9. That's a very welcome change. And I note that Council's intention to investigate more of the incidents, which will eventually lead to even better results. So I commend the staff.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Blacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderven, Councillor King, Councillor Stuttery and Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Operational Plan, Quarterly Progress Report, 14.4. Councillor Blacken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to move the recommendations of the motion that council receives and notes the Albury City Operational Plan Quarterly Progress Update, March 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stuttery.
Mr. Mayor, I formally second that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Blacken, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Yes, very briefly, this is reporting back on the 1 year cycle within the 4 year cycle and ultimately up to the 10-year cycle in Albury 2030. And that cascades down. It has a relationship with one of the report before the one last, but not a strict relationship because that's the operational programs. These are, sorry, the physical programs. These are all the other programs plus the physical programs as well. It's not surprising, therefore, that the program is approximately 10% behind schedule. Other than that, there's nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no question or further debate. Happy to put the motion. Those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Blacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stuchman, Councillor Mac. The motion is carried. Investment balances April 2020. Mover, thanks. Councillor Vanderman.
Happy to move that council receives and notes the investment balances report for the month of April 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure that this is a question or observation. So if you could please pass my observation on to the relevant member of staff. Of the big four banks, ANZ, CBA, NAB and Westpac, we have the bulk of our investments up to 20% with NAB and Westpac, and then less than 5% with ANZ and CBA, and we have our almost 5% with the two local banks, Hume and WAW. Are we snubbing ANZ or CBA, or is there an actual policy reason for the low investments in these two major banks? Thank you.
Mr Finlayson.
Thank you, Mr Finlayson. First time for the night.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question. The main reason is just the interest rates on offer with the investments that are available. So obviously the NAB and Westpac have been placing higher interest rates on their term deposits than what the ANZ and CBA have to offer.
Thank you, Mr Finlayson. Councillor Stosh, we happy with that? Thank you. Okay, bring no further questions or discussion. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to close debate on this item?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Glack, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Albury City Community Satisfaction Survey results, 14.6. Councillor Glacken.
Almost missed it. Thank you. To move the recommendation as a motion that council receives and notes the 2020 Albury City Community Satisfaction Survey results report.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Blacken, do you wish to open debate on that?
Simply to highlight the fact that the information in the report tells us that the response by the community is more favourable than the previous year and indeed previous years to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Question? No questions. Okay, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stuchman, Councillor Mack. The motion is carried. Okay, we have no delegates' reports for noting, and I'm not being made aware of any urgent business. Anyone with any urgent business wish to raise right now? No? Okay, so we have a confidential matter. So, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that we go into confidential the COVID-19 impact on Albury Airport, confidential item exclusive of press and public on the grounds that 2, the matters and information of the following, D, commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, 1, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it, Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A2C.
On the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Okay, and at this point, I'm supposed to ask if anyone in the public might have any submissions, but I don't think we have anyone capable of providing that. So, Councillor Doxey, do you have a question?
Mr Mayor, I'm just looking at on my screen, plus what's on here, is the Local Government Act 1993, number 30 section. Is that the right detail?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Councillor Doxey.
Yep. D1 or 2C? Okay.
NA2DI.
DI, yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to put that motion to go into confidential. All those in favour? Councillor Councillor Doxey, Councillor Con, Councillor Black and Councillor Cameron, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King, Councillor Stusby, Councillor Mack. So the motion is carried and we'll just be going off screen now and we will be discussing this matter in confidential. Thank you.